Willow Creek Estates. Early October. A Saturday morning like any other. Then a 42,000-pound moving truck rolled straight onto my 5-ton bridge. Neighbors froze. Everyone to get back. I didn't yell and started recording. Underneath the old timbers, a hairline crack had already begun to spread. Karen just laughed and said the weight limit sign was a suggestion. She had no idea what I'd spent 6 quiet months preparing. By the time the dust settled that afternoon, her whole empire came down with that bridge. My name is Sarah Coleman, a licensed civil engineer, and I live on the land my grandfather cleared 60 years ago, at the end of the only road into Willow Creek Estates. I'm raising my 15-year-old son Jake alone, and I like my coffee strong and my mornings quiet. The bridge across Willow Creek isn't the HOA's. It's mine. Built by my grandfather, sitting entirely on my deeded property, rated for exactly 5 tons. Every truck, moving van, and delivery for the whole subdivision has to cross it. And for years that arrangement worked just fine. Deborah Krantz became HOA president 2 years ago, and Willow Creek changed overnight. Newsletters turned into decrees. Fence colors got measured with a ruler. She called it maintaining standards, but what she really wanted was for every single person to answer to her. Debbie, as everyone called her behind closed doors, had a way of smiling while she threatened you. She'd corner you at the mailbox about your grass height, then wave sweetly at the next neighbor like nothing happened. People started avoiding the community center on meeting nights. The bridge sat outside her jurisdiction, and that bothered her more than anything. She brought it up at every meeting, insisting the HOA should formally manage it, insisting I was being difficult by refusing to hand over control of something my family had owned for 6 decades. I tried to be reasonable, help fund routine maintenance in exchange for continued access. Nothing more. Debbie wanted the deed transferred, or at minimum a signed agreement giving her board final say over every truck that crossed my grandfather's bridge. I refused, politely, in writing. She didn't take it well. Neighbors that I was putting the whole community at risk by keeping the bridge under private control, as if refusing to give it away made me the villain. Jake noticed it before I did. Kids at his school started repeating things their parents said about us, that we were selfish, difficult, hiding something. I realized Debbie wasn't just annoyed with me. She was building a narrative, brick by brick, in case she ever needed one. I checked the county records that week out of pure habit. Coleman Ridge, my grandfather's parcel, included the full creek crossing, easement rights clearly spelled out for residents, weight limit posted since 1994. Nothing ambiguous. It away, just in case. My neighbor Rosa, sweet, sharp-eyed, 71 years old, pulled me aside one afternoon. She did this at her old HOA in Peachtree, Rosa whispered. Ran the finance committee straight into a hole. They just don't talk about it anymore. I filed that away too. Debbie's husband Richard sat on the county board of commissioners, and she mentioned him constantly, like a loaded gun she kept on the table. Richard knows people at code enforcement, she'd say, smiling, whenever anyone questioned her decisions. Nobody ever questioned her decisions twice. The 5-ton sign at the foot of the bridge had been there since before I was born. Faded green letters, unmissable. Delivery drivers respected it without being told. Debbie treated it like an inconvenience standing between her and whatever project she had planned next. She started scheduling landscaping crews with heavier equipment. Always just this once. Always without asking. I let the first few slide, giving her the benefit of the doubt. Grandfather always said good fences make good neighbors. And I wanted to be a good neighbor, even to her. Then she proposed. At a board meeting I couldn't attend, that the HOA assume responsibility for bridge signage, meaning she'd have the sign altered to whatever weight limit suited her that week. A neighbor texted me a photo of the minutes. My stomach dropped reading it. I drove straight to the county records office the next morning and requested a certified copy of the last structural inspection. The bridge hadn't been formally re-rated in 11 years. 5 tons was the legal, binding limit, and no HOA vote could change a county safety rating. I brought that certified copy to the next meeting myself. Debbie's smile flickered, just for a second, before she recovered. "We'll look into updating that," she said smoothly, moving on to the next agenda item like I hadn't just proven her wrong in front of everyone. Afterward, she caught me in the parking lot. "You embarrassed me in there," she said quietly. No smile this time. "I didn't do anything but read a document," I said. She stared at me a long moment. "We'll see how this goes for you," she said, and walked away. Within a week, I got my first HOA violation notice for a garden gnome Jake had painted for a school project, sitting harmlessly on our porch step. $50 fine. But exactly the kind of thing designed to waste your time and make you doubt yourself. Then came a notice about our mailbox post, technically 2 inches taller than code. Then one about a tarp covering firewood. Each fine was small, almost laughable alone, but together they formed a pattern I recognized immediately: harassment dressed up as paperwork. I paid the fines, kept every receipt, and started a folder. Not out of paranoia, but out of habit. Engineers document everything, because someday, somewhere, someone asks for proof. I labeled it simply Willow Creek. I had no idea yet how thick that folder would get. Rosa started leaving little notes in my mailbox. Small warnings. Things she'd overheard at the clubhouse. "She's telling people you're hiding money from the bridge tolls," one note read. There were no tolls. Debbie was inventing a story where I was the criminal. By the end of that first month, I understood something clearly. This wasn't really about a bridge, a fence, or a gnome. It was about control. And control was the one thing Deborah Krantz could not stand to live without, especially from a woman who wouldn't hand it over. The morning it happened, I was refilling the bird feeder when I heard the low growl of a diesel engine coming up the county road toward my bridge, louder than any delivery van had ever been. I walked around front just as a fully loaded landscaping dump truck rolled up. The driver hesitated at the sign, squinting at the faded 5-ton lettering, clearly doing math in his head. Before he could back up, Debbie's silver SUV pulled in behind him, blocking any retreat, and she leaned out her window waving him forward like a traffic cop. "That sign's outdated. Go on through," she called out. I jogged down my driveway. "Hand up." "Stop right there," I said. "That truck is nowhere near rated for this bridge." The driver looked between us, caught in the middle of something that wasn't his fight. Debbie got out of her SUV, arms crossed, chin lifted in that way she had. "This is a community access road, Sarah, and I'm the HOA president. I'm authorizing this delivery. It's my bridge, I said, keeping my voice level. You don't have that authority. A small crowd had gathered by then, the way crowds do in quiet neighborhoods when voices rise. Debbie turned to them, playing to the audience instantly. She wants to hold up landscaping for the whole entrance. Over a piece of paper from decades ago, she said, shaking her head. It's not a piece of paper. It's a county-certified safety rating, I said, pulling my phone up to show the inspection report I'd photographed weeks earlier. Nobody in the crowd moved closer to look. Debbie's version was easier to believe, and easier was what people wanted. The driver, to his credit, refused to cross without written authorization from the bridge's actual owner. Debbie's face tightened. Fine, she snapped. We'll route the truck the long way, and I'll be filing a formal complaint about obstruction against you at the next meeting. She filed it 2 days later, claiming I'd endangered a contracted vendor and disrupted HOA business. I attached my own statement, along with the inspection report, and a photo of her SUV physically blocking the driver's exit. The board tabled the complaint without a real vote. That should have ended it. Debbie treated the tabled complaint as unfinished business, the kind of insult she couldn't let go of. She started introducing herself to new residents with a warning built right into her welcome speech. Watch out for the bridge situation with the Colemans. I noticed the crack for the first time that same week. A thin gray line running along the underside of the third support beam, right where the heaviest wheels had idled while the driver argued with Debbie. Small. But I know what stress fractures look like. I photographed it, dated it, and sent a formal notice to the HOA board explaining that any future overweight crossings could worsen existing damage and create real liability for everyone involved, including Debbie personally, since she'd directed the vendor to attempt the crossing. Debbie's response arrived within the hour. CCING the entire board. She called my notice fear-mongering and an attempt to extort the community for bridge repair funds. A phrase so absurd I read it twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood her. Rosa called me that night. Voice hushed. She's telling people you're planning to sue the whole HOA, Rosa said. I'm planning to keep a bridge from collapsing, I said. I know that, Rosa said. But you should know what she's saying, because it's working on some people. I hired an independent inspector out of my own pocket that week. Quiet, thorough man named Mr. Alvarez, who'd certified bridges for the county for 20 years. He photographed the crack, took measurements, and told me plainly it needed monitoring, though it wasn't yet critical. Wasn't critical yet became the phrase I carried with me for the next several months. A countdown clock ticking somewhere under my calm exterior every time I heard a truck engine coming up the road toward my grandfather's bridge. Debbie, meanwhile, seemed to interpret my restraint as weakness rather than patience. At the following meeting, she proposed a motion to explore eminent domain options for the bridge, insisting private control of shared infrastructure was, in her words, a liability nobody signed up for. The motion failed, 7-2, but the fact that she'd brought it at all told me everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a campaign, and I had officially become the obstacle standing between Deborah Krantz and something she badly wanted. I started keeping a written log of every truck, every crossing, every date, weight class where I could estimate it, exactly like I'd log field data on a real job site. Jake asked why I was being so careful. Because someday somebody's going to ask, I told him. What I didn't tell him yet was that I'd also requested, quietly, a copy of every HOA financial disclosure filed with the state over the past 3 years. Something about the timing of Debbie's aggression toward the bridge felt less like control and more like desperation. The first disclosure I pulled showed a landscaping and community beautification line item that had tripled in 2 years, with no corresponding new landscaping anyone in the neighborhood had actually seen. I didn't understand it yet, but I underlined it twice in red. Within days, 3 more violation notices arrived at my house in a single envelope, as if Debbie had been saving them up like ammunition. Overgrown hedge, unregistered trailer, improperly stored recycling bins. Combined fines, $410. Due within 14 days. I appealed all 3 at the next meeting, calmly, with photographs proving the hedge had been trimmed the week prior. The trailer was registered, and the bins sat exactly where every other house on the street kept theirs. The board upheld 2 of the 3 anyway. Debbie didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. She thanked the board for holding everyone to the same standard, while sitting 3 feet from a resident whose actual overgrown yard she'd never once cited, because that resident happened to bring her banana bread every Christmas. Word started spreading through the neighborhood group chat, a mix of sympathy and quiet fear. A few neighbors messaged me privately, saying they believed me but couldn't say so publicly, worried about becoming Debbie's next target. I understood. I just felt the walls closing in a little. Jake started getting quieter at school, and one evening he finally told me a classmate's mom had said our family was the reason the neighborhood couldn't get nice things. 15 years old, carrying a fight that wasn't his, because Debbie needed a villain and I refused to play the part she wanted. I sat him down that night and told him the truth. Plainly, the way my grandfather always told me things. Sometimes doing the right thing makes you unpopular before it makes you right, I said. He nodded slowly. He asked. Yes, I said. I promise. Debbie escalated again the following week, sending a certified letter threatening legal action if I didn't grant the HOA emergency access rights to the bridge for an upcoming event, a gala she was planning to celebrate the neighborhood's 5th anniversary. I hadn't been invited. Of course, the gala, she announced at the meeting, would include a catering tent, a small stage, string lights strung across the entrance, and a rented photo booth trailer, all of it needing to cross my bridge on a single Saturday afternoon in December. She hadn't asked me. I calculated the combined weight of everything she'd listed, conservatively, and it came to just under 9 tons if the vendors arrived together, nearly double my bridge's rating. I sent a formal written objection, citing the exact tonnage. CCING, the county's code enforcement office, for the record. Debbie's reply came fast and furious, accusing me of trying to sabotage community morale and punish innocent families over what she called a technicality. She copied the entire mailing list this time, 300 households, turning a private dispute into a public spectacle overnight. My inbox filled with messages within hours, some supportive, most confused, a few outright hostile. One neighbor I'd known for years wrote simply, "Just let them have the party. Sarah, it's one day." I stared at that message a long time before I closed my laptop. Rosa showed up at my door that evening with a casserole and an apology she didn't owe me. "People are scared of her," she said, sitting at my kitchen table. Scared of fines. Scared of being the next target. It's easier to be mad at you than at her. I get it, I said. And I meant it. Fear is a currency, and Debbie had spent years teaching this neighborhood to pay it. I wasn't angry at my neighbors. I was starting to understand exactly what kind of person I was actually dealing with. Mr. 2 days later, with an update on the crack he'd been monitoring. It had grown. Slightly. Consistent with recent stress rather than natural aging. If something heavy crosses again soon, he said carefully, I wouldn't want to guess what happens next. I brought his written assessment to the next board meeting, hoping cold engineering facts might cut through the noise Debbie had created. She barely glanced at it. We'll get our own inspector, she said dismissively. One who isn't on the Coleman's payroll. That comment landed harder than she probably intended, questioning not just my judgment but my integrity as a licensed engineer, in front of neighbors who had no idea what my job actually was. A few people exchanged glances. It was the first time I saw doubt crack her audience. Debbie's own inspector, turned out, was a cousin of her landscaper, unlicensed, uninsured, and willing to sign whatever document she handed him for $200 cash. I found this out from Rosa, who'd heard it directly from the landscaper's wife at church that Sunday. The cousin's inspection declared the bridge fit for up to 15 tons, a number with no engineering basis whatsoever, scribbled on letterhead that didn't even list a license number. Debbie presented it at the next meeting like it settled the matter permanently. I requested his credentials formally, in writing, per the HOA's own bylaws requiring licensed professionals for any structural determination affecting shared infrastructure. Debbie ignored the request for 11 days, then finally admitted, under pressure from one skeptical board member, that he wasn't licensed at all. The board member who pushed for that admission, a quiet man named Tom Ferris who rarely spoke at meetings, caught my eye afterward with a small nod. It wasn't much. Out from inside Debbie's own board, and I noticed. Debbie didn't apologize for the fake inspection. She simply pivoted, claiming she'd been misled by her landscaper, and pushed forward with gala planning as if the entire episode hadn't happened. I began to understand this was simply how she operated. Deny, deflect, repeat. I filed a formal complaint with the county about the unlicensed inspection attempt, not to punish anyone, but to create a paper trail. The county sent back a brief acknowledgement letter. Small. But it was now a matter of official record, and official records don't disappear. Jake found me at my desk late one night, surrounded by printed emails, photos, and the growing Willow Creek folder. You're building a case, he said. Not really a question. I'm building the truth, I said. Sometimes that looks the same from the outside. Debbie announced the gala date would move up 2 weeks, to late November, due to scheduling conflicts, though everyone suspected it was really to beat any potential legal restriction I might pursue. I didn't argue publicly. I simply started making calls of my own. I contacted the county's structural safety division and requested, formally, a scheduled routine inspection of the bridge, the kind any private bridge owner is entitled to request. They offered me a date, close to the gala, without telling anyone why. It wasn't a trap yet. Not really, just a safety net. I told myself that. Calm engineer's logic. I knew exactly what would happen if Debbie's vendors crossed that bridge while a county inspector happened to be standing right there watching. Rosa asked me once if I felt guilty planning it that way. I told her the truth. I wasn't planning anything except protecting my family's property and following the law. If the timing happened to expose something else in the process, that wasn't manipulation. That was consequence. Debbie, unaware of the scheduled inspection, kept pushing forward, sending vendor contracts, ordering the photo booth trailer, booking a live band whose equipment truck alone weighed nearly 4 tons empty. Every choice she made was quietly, unknowingly, building toward the exact math I'd already calculated. Tom Ferris reached out to me privately that week. An email marked confidential. He said he'd been reviewing HOA financial statements for an unrelated reason and found some numbers that didn't add up, specifically around vendor payments Debbie had approved without board votes. I didn't respond right away. I sat with that email a long time, feeling the shape of something bigger than a bridge dispute starting to take form underneath everything. The way you sense a structural problem long before you can point to exactly where it started. I finally wrote back one line. I think we should talk. Tom replied within minutes, suggesting coffee, away from the neighborhood, away from anyone who might mention it to Debbie before we understood what we were actually looking at. Tom and I met at a diner 2 towns over, a place neither of us had any reason to be seen. He slid a folder across the table, printouts of check registers, vendor invoices, numbers circled in blue ink. Something's been off for over a year, he said quietly. The landscaping line item I'd underlined months earlier appeared again, tripled from its original budget, paid to a company that shared an address with Debbie's sister-in-law's nail salon. Neither of us said the word out loud yet. We didn't need to. For a few weeks, an uneasy quiet settled over Willow Creek. Debbie, busy with gala preparations, seemed to forget about me entirely, redirecting her energy into string lights and seating charts. I let the piece sit, wary, the way you trust good weather before a storm. I spent those quiet evenings finishing Mr. Alvarez's formal engineering report, organizing my Willow Creek folder into neat, labeled sections, violations, correspondence, financial questions, structural data. Grandfather always said preparation was just patience with a purpose. I finally understood exactly what he meant. Jake seemed lighter during that stretch too, laughing more at dinner, less burdened by hallway whispers at school as the neighborhood's attention drifted toward gala excitement instead of our bridge dispute. I let myself enjoy watching him relax, even knowing it might not last. Rosa brought over lemon cake one Sunday and told me, gently, that a few neighbors had started quietly asking questions about Debbie's spending, comparing notes at the mailbox in low voices. People aren't blind, she said. They're just careful about who they trust with what they see. Tom sent me a second folder that week. This one containing minutes from a board meeting 8 months earlier that I had no memory of. Minutes describing a vote authorizing the increased landscaping budget. A vote that never actually happened, because Tom had been present and no such vote occurred. I compared the signature on those forged minutes to Debbie's handwriting on my old violation notices. They matched, unmistakably, right down to the looping capital D she always signed with. I sat at my kitchen table a long time, just looking at that letter. Mr. One more update before the scheduled county inspection. The crack had grown another few millimeters, still not urgent, but trending in exactly the wrong direction. "Whatever's coming, Sarah," he said, "I hope it doesn't involve a fully loaded stage truck." I laughed a little too hard at that, the specific, nervous laugh of someone who knows precisely how likely that exact scenario has become. The gala was 3 weeks out. My county inspection was scheduled for that same Saturday afternoon, timed almost exactly with the event's setup window. I still hadn't decided what to do with Tom's folder. Part of me wanted to bring it to the board immediately. But another part, the engineer in me, knew that timing mattered, that evidence presented too early could be buried, denied, or explained away before it could do any good. So I waited. I kept the folder growing, quietly, patiently, the way you reinforce a structure before you test its limits, not after. Debbie kept planning her gala, oblivious to the 2 separate storms gathering on either side of her, unaware they were about to meet. The calm couldn't last. Of course. Calm never does in a story like this. But for those few weeks, Willow Creek breathed easier than it had in months, and I let myself believe, just a little, that maybe the worst had already happened. The calm ended the Tuesday Debbie announced, at an emergency meeting she'd called herself, that she was formally requesting the board approve a temporary weight limit override for the bridge, citing the forged minutes from 8 months earlier as precedent that such votes were routine. Tom raised his hand immediately. "I was at that meeting," he said, voice steady. "No such vote happened." A ripple went through the room. Debbie's smile flickered, the same flicker I'd seen once before, quickly replaced with practiced calm. "You must be misremembering, Tom," she said. "I have the actual notes I took that night," Tom said, pulling a small notebook from his jacket pocket. Worn, dated, clearly not something assembled after the fact. Debbie's eyes moved to the notebook, then away, then back to the room. "We can discuss this after the meeting," she said quickly. The board voted to table the override request. 5-2. An unusually decisive rejection given how routinely Debbie's proposals sailed through. I watched her face during the vote, the small tightening around her jaw, the first visible sign that her control over that room was slipping. She corners me again in the parking lot that night. The 3rd time now. Always the same shadowed corner near the recycling bins. "You put him up to this," she said. No preamble. "I didn't need to," I said. "He noticed the math on his own. People eventually do." Debbie's tone shifted from anger to something colder, quieter. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she said. "Richard sits on the county board. One phone call and your engineering license gets a very inconvenient audit. Think about that before you keep pushing this." I felt something settle in my chest. Not fear exactly, more like clarity. Threatening my livelihood over a 5-ton weight limit told me everything I needed to know about how far she was willing to go, and how much she believed she had left to protect. I called Mr. and asked him, formally, to expedite our scheduled inspection report and file a preliminary copy with the county immediately, rather than waiting for the full assessment. "Building your paper trail early," he said. "Smart." Friday. 2 days later, an anonymous complaint arrived at my engineering firm's licensing board, alleging conflict of interest and falsified structural claims regarding a private residential bridge. I recognized Richard's fingerprints on it instantly, even without a signature, The way you recognize a familiar shape in fog. The complaint was baseless, and I knew it wouldn't survive scrutiny, but responding to it still cost me 2 full days I couldn't afford to lose. Gathering documentation, writing statements, proving I hadn't done anything except tell the truth about a bridge that happened to be mine. My supervisor at the firm, the steady, no-nonsense woman named Priya, read through everything I submitted and shook her head. "This is retaliation. Plain and simple," she said. "Document every bit of it. If this escalates, we'll have our legal team ready to respond." Rosa, meanwhile, had been quietly talking to other longtime residents, comparing stories, comparing dates, comparing the small, strange inconsistencies each of them had noticed over the years and dismissed individually, never realizing how many others had noticed the exact same pattern. A woman named Priscilla, 3 streets over, admitted she'd once seen Debbie meeting with a contractor after hours, exchanging an envelope, months before that same contractor won a suspiciously uncontested bid for the neighborhood's entrance sign renovation. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. Individually, none of it proved anything. Together, laid out on Tom's kitchen table one evening with Rosa, Priscilla, and me all crowded around, it started to look less like isolated coincidences and more like a pattern someone had been running for a very long time. Tom mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Debbie had served on an HOA board in Peachtree before moving to Willow Creek. The same detail Rosa had told me months earlier. I finally looked it up myself that night, searching old local news archives for anything on record. A short article from 4 years earlier described a Peachtree Hills HOA facing a financial shortfall after its treasurer resigned abruptly. No criminal charges filed. No names published beyond a vague mention of leadership turnover. The timeline matched Debbie's move to Willow Creek almost exactly. I sat with that discovery a long time, the puzzle pieces sliding into a shape I recognized instantly from professional experience. Not chaos, not incompetence, but a pattern, repeated, refined, moved from one community to the next before anyone connected the dots. Debbie, unaware of what we'd started assembling, pressed forward with gala preparations at a fever pitch, ordering a larger stage than originally planned, adding a second equipment truck for enhanced lighting, each addition pushing the projected bridge crossing weight further past anything safe. I recalculated the totals with updated vendor lists Rosa managed to get from a sympathetic clubhouse volunteer, catering trailer, stage rig, lighting truck, photo booth, band equipment. Combined, conservatively, just over 11 tons. More than double the bridge's rating. All scheduled to cross within a single afternoon. Mr. Preliminary report landed with the county that Friday as promised, flagging the bridge's existing stress fracture and formally recommending no loads exceeding the posted 5-ton limit until full repairs could be completed. It became, officially, part of the county's active file. I forwarded a copy to the HOA board, per the bylaws requiring safety disclosures be shared with all members. Debbie fired back within the hour, CCING everyone, accusing me of trying to cancel the community's biggest celebration in 5 years out of spite and jealousy. Jealousy. 3 times. Almost impressed by the audacity of it. The way she twisted a documented safety hazard into a personal grievance about me somehow envying her gala. It was, I realized, exactly the kind of reframing that had worked on this neighborhood for years. A few neighbors pushed back publicly for the first time in the group chat, gently but firmly, pointing out that a licensed inspector's report probably deserved more weight than accusations of jealousy. Debbie went quiet in the thread for nearly a full day, unusual for her. When she finally responded, it was to announce, without explanation, that the gala's official route would now cross the bridge in stages, with weight monitored by HOA volunteers, a plan with no engineering basis whatsoever, designed purely to sound responsible without actually being responsible. I requested, in writing, exactly what qualifications those HOA volunteers held for structural weight assessment. Debbie didn't answer. Asked her landscaper's unlicensed cousin to help coordinate the crossing, the same man whose fake 15-ton rating she'd already been caught using once. Richard made his first direct appearance in the conflict that week, calling my firm's office line personally, identifying himself as a county commissioner, asking pointed questions about my licensing status in a tone clearly meant to intimidate whoever answered. Priya took the call and handled it without blinking. He was fishing, Priya told me afterward, trying to see if we'd panic and pull you off the project. I told him our engineers stand by their documented findings, and that any further contact should go through our legal counsel. I thanked her more times than she probably needed. That night, lying awake, I finally opened Tom's folder in full for the first time. Every page, every circled number, every forged signature, laying it all out on my dining table under the kitchen light. Jake long asleep upstairs, the house quiet except for my own thinking. The pattern was undeniable once I let myself see the whole shape of it. Inflated landscaping budgets, uncontested vendor bids to companies with family ties, forged meeting minutes granting herself authority the bylaws never actually gave her. And now, a 5-ton bridge she was determined to override by force. I called Mr. Time before finalizing anything, asking a purely technical question. What would a fully loaded stage truck idling on that bridge, on top of an existing stress fracture, actually do? Worst case. He was quiet a moment. Worst case. It doesn't hold, he said. I asked him to put that assessment in writing too, formally, dated, specific to the gala's projected load. He agreed without hesitation, telling me he'd been in this field long enough to know exactly when a warning needed to exist on paper rather than just in conversation. Rosa asked me directly, one evening over tea, whether I was planning to stop the gala outright, cancel it, force a confrontation before anyone got hurt. No, I told her honestly. I'm planning to let the truth arrive exactly when it needs to, in front of exactly the right people. She studied me a long moment, the way you study someone you've known long enough to trust their calm, even when you don't fully understand their plan yet. Your grandfather would be proud of you, she said finally. Stubborn as a fence post, just like him. Debbie, for her part, had started sensing something shifting beneath her, though she couldn't name it exactly. She grew sharper at meetings, quicker to anger, quicker to threaten fines over smaller and smaller infractions, as if tightening her grip could stop the ground from moving underneath her. She fined a family 2 doors down for a Halloween wreath left up 3 days past her arbitrary deadline. She fined a retired veteran for a flagpole angle she claimed violated aesthetic uniformity. Each new fine chipped away a little more goodwill she didn't seem to realize she was spending. Tom quietly resigned from the board that week. Not in protest, but strategically, telling only me and Rosa the real reason. He wanted to be a witness rather than a board member when everything eventually came forward, unbound by any conflict of interest that might undercut his credibility later. I understood the move immediately. Engineer to accountant, both of us thinking several steps ahead the way our training demanded. Timing matters, Tom said, echoing something I'd been telling myself for weeks. Bring it out too early, and it gets buried. Bring it out too late, and someone gets hurt. With 11 days left until the gala, I filed one final formal request with the county's Structural Safety Division, asking that my previously scheduled inspection be confirmed for that exact Saturday afternoon, citing the newly documented crack progression and the HOA's announced intent to exceed posted weight limits. The county confirmed the appointment within 2 days, assigning it to a senior field inspector named Marcus Whitfield, a man Mr. Alvarez described as thorough to the point of being famous for it among local contractors, someone who documented everything and cut corners for absolutely no one. I didn't tell Debbie about the inspection. I wasn't obligated to. It was my property, my request, my legal right as the bridge's owner. What happened to cross paths with her gala setup that same afternoon was, strictly speaking, simply an unfortunate scheduling coincidence for her. Priscilla mentioned, almost in passing, that Debbie had recently pressured the same unlicensed cousin inspector to sign a second document. This one claiming the bridge had already been privately reinforced earlier that fall. A repair that had never actually happened. Not by anyone. Not by any crew. I photographed the underside of the bridge myself that same week. Time-stamped. Angle matched to earlier photos, showing clearly that no reinforcement work existed anywhere near the support beams. The crack, if anything, looked slightly longer than it had in Mr. Alvarez's last measurement. Jake helped me organize the final folder that weekend, printing copies, labeling tabs, quietly proud in a way that made my chest ache a little. 15 years old and already understanding that sometimes protecting your family looks like spreadsheets and certified engineering reports rather than anything dramatic. What happens if she finds out about the inspection before Saturday? Jake asked, sorting papers into a neat stack. Then she finds out, I said. I'm not hiding anything. Safety inspection on my own property. That's not a trap. He grinned at that, the first real grin I'd seen from him in weeks regarding any of this. It's kind of a trap though, he said. Only, I told him, because she keeps walking directly toward the one thing that was always going to catch her eventually. With 9 days left, Debbie sent a neighborhood-wide email announcing the gala's finalized vendor schedule. Timestamps included every heavy truck arriving between 1 and 3 that Saturday afternoon. Precisely, unknowingly, overlapping with the exact window I'd already confirmed for Marcus Whitfield's county inspection. Priya sat with me one evening that same week, reviewing everything I'd gathered so far, and told me something I carried with me the rest of that year. Documentation isn't about winning an argument, she said. It's about making sure the truth survives long enough to matter when it counts. I thought about my grandfather often during those months. The way he'd talk about load ratings like moral lessons, insisting a structure only lies to you once before it tells you the truth permanently. I understood, watching Debbie, that people worked exactly the same way, given enough weight and enough time. Mr. told me, half joking, that engineers made good witnesses to human nature precisely because bridges and people failed for the same underlying reason. Something got asked to carry more than it was ever honestly rated for. And eventually, quietly, the truth simply stopped being negotiable. Tom mentioned once that he'd almost stayed silent entirely, worried about the social cost of speaking up in a neighborhood that clearly rewarded compliance over honesty. What changed his mind, he said, was watching me keep showing up to every meeting anyway. Calm, prepared, refusing to disappear quietly. Rose's notes kept arriving in my mailbox through those hardest weeks. Small folded scraps of paper carrying pieces of a puzzle neither of us fully understood yet. Her quiet courage every bit as important, in its own steady way, as any certified engineering report I ever filed. Jake asked me once, during that long stretch of violation notices and threatening letters, whether it would have just been easier to give Debbie the bridge and avoid the whole fight entirely. Sometimes easier isn't the same as right, I told him. And sometimes right just takes longer to prove. Priscilla admitted later that she'd almost deleted the photo of the envelope exchange out of fear, keeping it only because something about the whole arrangement had never sat right with her. A small nagging doubt she carried quietly for months before finally trusting it enough to speak up. Marcus told me afterward that in 20 years of county inspections, he'd rarely seen a private property owner build as thorough a documentation trail as I had, unprompted, months before any real emergency arrived. Most people wait until it's already too late, he said. You didn't, Richard. In the weeks following the divorce filing, reached out once, briefly, to apologize for the intimidation call to my firm, admitting he'd let his wife's certainty convince him of things he should have questioned much sooner. I accepted the apology, though it didn't undo the damage it had caused. Debbie, sensing the ground shifting though she couldn't name why, called an emergency closed-door session of the remaining board members, excluding Tom entirely. Now that he'd resigned, pushing through a rushed motion granting herself emergency authority over all bridge-related decisions through the end of the year. The motion passed 4-2. Thin support secured through what I later learned were quiet threats about upcoming re-election fines and selective enforcement. The kind of pressure that doesn't show up in meeting minutes but works exactly as effectively as anything written down ever could. Armed with her manufactured authority, Debbie sent me a formal letter demanding I remove the 5-ton signage entirely before the gala, calling it outdated misinformation actively harming community morale, threatening a lawsuit for interference with HOA operations if I refused within 72 hours. I responded with a single certified letter of my own, attaching the county's active safety file, Mr. Alvarez's formal recommendation, and a copy of the deed proving the sign. The bridge and the land beneath it belonged entirely to me. I did not remove the sign. Debbie's next move surprised even Rosa, who'd seen plenty over the years. She hired a private contractor, paid in cash according to Priscilla's landscaper contact, to attempt quietly reinforcing the bridge's support beams overnight. Without permits, without an engineer, without telling me anything about it at all. I caught them at 11 at night, headlights sweeping across my front windows, 2 men unloading steel bracing from a truck bed at the foot of my own bridge. I walked out in my robe, phone already recording, and asked exactly what authority they believed they had to touch my property. The younger worker looked immediately uncomfortable, glancing at his older coworker, who simply said, We were told the HOA owns this crossing. The HOA doesn't own an inch of it, I said. Calm. Clear. Still recording. I'd like to see whatever paperwork sent you out here tonight. They had none. Of course. Only a text message from Debbie's number instructing them to reinforce the west supports before Saturday. Keep it quiet. The older worker, uneasy about the whole arrangement, forwarded me a screenshot before they packed up and left. Unpaid for a job never finished. I called Mr. next morning. Then the county, filing a formal report of unauthorized, unpermitted structural work attempted on a private bridge already under active safety review. Marcus Whitfield himself called me back within the hour, unusually fast for a county office. This changes the scope of Saturday's inspection significantly, he told me. Unpermitted work attempted on a structure with a documented stress fracture, days before a scheduled overweight event, is the kind of thing that gets a second inspector added, and possibly law enforcement notified in advance. I hadn't asked for that. Debbie's own recklessness had done more to escalate the county's attention than anything I could have engineered myself. And something in me went quiet and steady, the particular calm that comes right before you know exactly how a structure will fail. Rosa arrived at my door that same afternoon, pale, holding her phone out. Debbie had posted in the neighborhood group chat, publicly this time, accusing me by name of orchestrating a smear campaign and hinting, without quite saying it outright, that Jake and I were somehow unstable and dangerous. I read it twice, feeling something cold settle where the calm had been a moment earlier. Bringing my 15-year-old son into her public narrative crossed a line every previous fine and threat had circled but never quite touched. I closed my laptop and sat very still for a long moment. Priya, my supervisor, saw the post too, forwarded to her by a mutual contact, and called me immediately. That's defamation, Sarah. Plain and clear, she said. Document it, screenshot it, timestamp it. If this woman wants to make this personal and public, we make sure there's a record of exactly how she did it. I did exactly that, calmly, methodically, adding it to the growing folder that had stopped feeling like paperwork weeks ago and started feeling like armor. Jake found me at the table that night and simply sat beside me quietly, not asking questions, just present, the way he'd learned to be lately. Debbie escalated once more within 48 hours, filing an actual restraining order request against me with the county courthouse, citing harassment and intimidation, built almost entirely on the video I'd taken of her unauthorized contractors, twisted in her filing to suggest I had been the one threatening them. The hearing was scheduled quickly, only 4 days before the gala, and I arrived with Priya, Mr. Alvarez's written statements, the contractor's forwarded text screenshot, and Tom, who agreed to testify to the pattern of forged documents and pressured votes he'd witnessed firsthand over the past year. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who clearly had little patience for wasted court time, reviewed the evidence for less than 10 minutes before dismissing Debbie's request outright, noting on the record that the video showed Debbie's own contractors admitting to unauthorized work. Nothing resembling harassment on my part. Debbie's face, for the first time since I'd known her, showed something other than practiced composure. A flicker of real panic quickly smoothed over as she gathered her things and left the courtroom without another word, Richard trailing slightly behind her, his own expression unreadable. Outside the courthouse, Rosa hugged me tight, And Tom shook my hand with a kind of quiet, exhausted relief. That's the first real crack in her armor, he said. A public dismissal. On the record. People will hear about this whether she wants them to or not. News of the dismissed restraining order moved through the neighborhood faster than any HOA newsletter ever had. Whispered at mailboxes. Typed carefully into private messages. The group chat suddenly buzzing with a different tone entirely. Less certainty about Debbie. More open. Cautious questioning. With 2 days remaining before the gala, Debbie made her most extreme move yet, quietly instructing the stage and lighting vendors to reroute around the official entrance and cross my bridge in the early morning instead, before I'd typically be awake, hoping to complete the crossing unnoticed. I wasn't asleep, weak at all, running on adrenaline and coffee, checking my phone every few hours out of habit. At 5:40 that morning, motion-activated cameras I'd quietly installed weeks earlier caught headlights approaching the bridge in the dark. I called Marcus Whitfield's emergency line immediately, the number he'd given me after the unauthorized reinforcement incident, and he answered on the second ring, already halfway dressed by the sound of it, telling me he'd have someone out within 20 minutes given the active file status. The lighting truck driver, unaware of any of this, simply idled at the foot of the bridge, engine running, waiting for a text confirmation from Debbie's assistant that the coast was clear, exactly the kind of hesitation that gave the county's overnight patrol officer enough time to arrive first. The officer, responding to Marcus's flagged file rather than any call from me directly, asked the driver for his cargo manifest and weight documentation, standard procedure for any vehicle attempting to cross a bridge under active county safety review. The driver, visibly nervous, admitted he had no such paperwork. Debbie's assistant arrived moments later, flustered, trying to explain the early crossing as a scheduling adjustment, while the officer calmly informed her that attempting to cross a flag structure without documented authorization could result in citations for both the driver and whoever had directed the crossing. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand, saying nothing, doing nothing, simply present as a witness on my own property, while the exact scenario I'd quietly prepared for months unfolded entirely on its own. Driven forward by nobody's choices but Debbie's own relentless need to win. The truck reversed off the bridge without incident. No damage done. The crack undisturbed for one more day. But the officer's report, filed that morning, now sat in the same growing county record as Mr. Alvarez's warnings, the unlicensed inspection, the unauthorized reinforcement attempt, and the dismissed restraining order. Debbie called an emergency all-hands meeting that evening. Gala Eve. Her voice tight over the phone tree message she recorded herself, insisting the celebration would proceed as planned, rain or shine, obstacles or not. A phrase that sounded less like confidence and more like someone refusing to see what was coming. Rosa texted me that night. She's telling people tomorrow will prove you wrong once and for all.
I read the message twice, feeling something settle in my chest that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite dread, just the particular stillness of watching a structure you've studied finally reach its limit.
I called Mr. and before bed. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, you've done everything right. Documented, warned, escalated through every proper channel available to you. Nobody can say you didn't try to prevent this. I thanked him and finally, exhausted, managed a few hours of sleep. Jake found me at the kitchen table at dawn, already dressed, folder tucked under my arm, coffee in hand. "Are you scared?" he asked. I thought about it honestly before answering. "No," I said. "I built this bridge's whole case the same way Grandpa built the bridge itself. To whole." He hugged me before school, longer than usual. "Good luck, Mom," he said. "It's not luck," I told him, smiling despite the knot in my stomach. "It's just math." Finally catching up to somebody who thought she could ignore it forever. He laughed and headed out the door. Marcus Whitfield texted me at 7 that morning, confirming his arrival time for the scheduled inspection. 1 o'clock sharp, precisely, unknowingly, in the exact middle of Debbie's announced vendor crossing window. I set my own folder by the front door, ready, and waited for the day to begin. By 10 that morning, Willow Creek buzzed with gala energy. String lights strung along the clubhouse fence. Folding chairs arranged in careful rows. A banner reading 5 years strong stretched proudly across the entrance sign Debbie had personally selected the font for months earlier. Neighbors moved through the morning with cautious excitement. Some genuinely looking forward to the celebration. Others clearly aware, thanks to Rose's quiet network, that something larger than a party might be unfolding by afternoon. Though nobody said it directly, not yet, not out loud. Debbie arrived at the clubhouse at 11. Dressed sharply, clipboard in hand, directing volunteers with the brisk confidence of someone who believed she'd already won every fight that mattered. If she felt any lingering unease from the courthouse or the early morning incident, she hid it completely. Richard trailed behind her most of the morning, phone pressed to his ear more often than not, his expression tightening slightly each time he glanced toward the bridge, as though some instinct he couldn't quite name was warning him this particular Saturday might not go the way he hoped. Noon. The catering trailer crossed first, carefully, at a controlled speed, well within limits alone, though Mr. Alvarez had warned repeatedly that it wasn't any single vehicle that worried him. It was the cumulative weight of everything arriving together. Idling, waiting its turn at the narrow crossing point. I stood on my own porch that afternoon, folder beside me, phone charged, watching the vendor line begin forming at the foot of the bridge exactly as scheduled. Catering trailer already across, photo booth trailer next in line, stage truck and lighting rig idling behind it, engines running. Marcus Whitfield's county vehicle turned onto the road at 12:50, 10 minutes ahead of schedule, exactly as he'd promised, parking discreetly near the bridge's county-side marker post rather than announcing himself immediately, taking in the scene with the practiced, unhurried patience of a man who'd seen plenty of neighborhoods overreach before. Debbie noticed the county vehicle almost immediately, her clipboard lowering slightly as she registered the seal on the door. She crossed the lawn quickly, plastering on her clubhouse smile. "Officer, welcome. We're just finishing setup for our community celebration. Everything's completely under control here." "Inspector." Actually, Marcus corrected mildly, extending a hand she didn't immediately take. "Marcus Whitfield, County Structural Safety. I have a scheduled inspection on this bridge for 1 o'clock today. Filed through the private property owner's request several weeks ago." Debbie's smile held, but something behind her eyes shifted visibly. "There must be some mix-up," she said quickly. This bridge falls under HOA jurisdiction for community events. Marcus glanced at his clipboard, unbothered. According to county records, it doesn't. It's privately deeded to a Sarah Coleman. 5-ton rated, currently flagged for an active structural concern. I'll need everyone clear of the crossing for the inspection. I walked down my driveway then, folder in hand, joining them at the bridge's edge. Calm, deliberate, every step the product of months of preparation rather than anything sudden or impulsive. Mister, I said, thank you for confirming. I have the full documentation ready whenever you're ready to review it. Debbie's eyes flicked between us, calculating, the way I imagined she always calculated, searching for the angle that would let her spin the scene back in her favor before an audience that was, I noticed, growing steadily larger as neighbors drifted over from the clubhouse to see what was happening. This is exactly what I warned everyone about, Debbie announced loudly, turning to the gathering crowd. Sarah's been trying to sabotage this event from the very beginning, and now she's brought the county into it to embarrass this community on our biggest day. A few uncertain murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Marcus, unbothered by the theatrics, simply lifted his clipboard and addressed the crowd directly, calm and procedural. This inspection was scheduled weeks ago by the property owner. It's standard practice for any structure with a documented stress fracture and a history of unauthorized load attempts. Please clear the crossing area. The stage truck driver, still idling in line behind the photo booth trailer, called out uncertainly, Ma'am, do you still want us to cross? Or should we wait? Debbie hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. The first genuine crack of indecision I'd seen from her in months. Cross, she said finally, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Chin lifted, committing fully to the bluff. This inspector has no authority to shut down a scheduled community event over paperwork technicalities. Marcus simply turned his clipboard toward her, showing the county seal at the top of the active file. Ma'am, this isn't a technicality, he said evenly. This is an active safety hazard with documented history, including an unauthorized reinforcement attempt 4 nights ago and a dismissed restraining order this same week. If that truck crosses right now, I'll be filing an immediate obstruction and endangerment report. The crowd's murmur shifted noticeably, phones coming out, a few neighbors exchanging wide-eyed glances. Priscilla near the front visibly recording on her phone. Rosa standing quietly beside me. Steady, unwavering. Exactly the presence I needed in that particular moment without either of us saying a word. Debbie's composure, built over years of practiced authority, finally began visibly fraying at the edges. You're all overreacting, she said, voice rising slightly, sharper than her usual clubhouse smoothness. This bridge has held up trucks for years. This is just Sarah's engineer buddy trying to make her look important. Mr. who I'd quietly asked to attend as a second professional witness, stepped forward from the crowd where he'd been standing unnoticed for the past 10 minutes. I certified the original stress fracture myself. Ma'am, 3 months ago, filed with the county the same week. This isn't a personal favor. It's documented fact. Something shifted visibly across Debbie's face then. The recognition of a losing position. The same expression I imagined she'd worn once before, years ago, in a different neighborhood, right before whatever had happened in Peachtree finally caught up with her too. Richard finally moved, stepping toward Debbie, speaking low and urgent, though not quiet enough to escape the crowd entirely. "Deb, stop. Just stop. Let the inspector do his job," he said, an edge of real fear in his voice that hadn't been there through any of her previous escalations. Debbie spun toward him, something raw and furious breaking through the composure entirely for the first time. "Don't you dare take their side right now," she hissed, low enough that only those closest caught it fully, though the crowd's growing silence meant plenty of people caught enough. The stage truck driver, caught in the middle of a fight that clearly had nothing to do with him, made his own decision then, shifting into reverse without waiting for further instruction from anyone, easing his rig slowly back away from the bridge's edge, unwilling to be the one who caused whatever was about to happen. But the lighting truck behind him, driven by a younger contractor who'd only been told to follow the truck ahead, hadn't heard the exchange clearly enough over his own idling engine, and began inching forward instead, misreading the moment entirely, edging his front wheels onto the bridge's worn timber planks. "Stop!" 3 voices called out at once. Mine, Marcus's, and Mr. Alvarez's, sharp and simultaneous, cutting through the crowd's murmur instantly. The young driver slammed his brakes, but not before his truck's full front axle had already settled its weight directly onto the bridge's already compromised support beam. A sound cracked through the afternoon air then, low, splintering, unmistakable to anyone who'd ever heard old would give way under too much weight, and the entire crowd went silent at once, every phone camera swinging instinctively toward the bridge as the front corner of the support beam visibly buckled downward. The lighting truck driver froze, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, eyes wide, engine still running, front wheels resting on a beam now sagging visibly beneath them. Marcus was already moving, waving both arms overhead. "Everybody back. Now. Clear the area completely. This structure is compromising in real time." The crowd scrambled backward in a wave, gasps rising sharp and immediate, someone screaming for the driver to get out, Debbie standing frozen at the center of it all, clipboard forgotten at her feet, watching in real time as the exact disaster she'd been warned about for months finally, undeniably, arrived. The driver scrambled out of the cab, dropping to the ground and running clear just as a second. Louder crack echoed across the creek, the support beam splitting fully this time, the truck's front end tilting hard toward the widening gap in the old timber decking. Marcus barked into his radio for immediate backup and a structural emergency response, his voice sharp and professional even as the scene around him dissolved into chaos. Neighbors pulling children back from the edge of the yard. Someone's dog barking wildly at the commotion filling the afternoon air. I stood frozen for one long breath, every engineering instinct in my body screaming the same warning I'd been quietly documenting for months. Watching my grandfather's bridge, 60 years standing, finally buckle under exactly the weight I'd calculated, warned about, and tried desperately to prevent through every legal channel available. The truck's front axle sank another foot as the beam gave way completely, the vehicle groaning, tilting further, though thankfully, mercifully, its rear wheels still gripped solid ground, keeping it from sliding fully into the creek below, suspended in a precarious, splintering balance over the widening gap. Rosa grabbed my arm, steadying herself as much as steadying me, both of us watching the scene unfold with the particular helplessness of people who'd seen this coming and still couldn't do a single thing to stop it once the moment actually arrived. Debbie remained rooted near the clubhouse lawn, face pale, hands pressed to her mouth. The clipboard she'd carried all day lying forgotten in the grass at her feet. Gala banner fluttering absurdly behind her. 5 years strong stretched over a scene that looked nothing like strength at all. Marcus moved quickly and calmly despite the chaos, directing the crowd further back, checking on the shaken driver, radioing for a structural engineer and emergency crew. Every action precise, practiced, the exact opposite of the panic rippling through everyone else gathered along the creek's edge. Mr. Him at the bridge's edge within moments. The two professionals conferring in low, urgent tones, assessing the damage, confirming no one remained on the structure, determining the truck could likely be safely extracted once proper equipment arrived, though the bridge itself was now unmistakably unsalvageable in its current form. I found my voice finally, walking toward Marcus and Mr. Alvarez, folder still tucked under my arm. The same folder I'd built for months precisely for a moment like this one, though some part of me had genuinely hoped it would never actually need using this way. I have the full documentation ready, I told Marcus quietly. Every warning, every violation, every unauthorized attempt to override the posted limit, dated and filed exactly as it happened. He nodded, already pulling out his own tablet to begin the formal incident report right there at the scene. Behind us, the crowd had shifted from panic to something quieter, more unsettled, neighbors turning slowly to look at Debbie rather than at the sagging truck. The weight of understanding finally settling over Willow Creek the way it had been threatening to for months, arriving all at once instead of gradually. She knew, someone in the crowd said, not loudly, but clearly enough to carry. She knew about the crack and she made them cross anyway. Priscilla's phone, still recording, captured the moment perfectly. Debbie's frozen expression, the tilted truck, the murmur spreading steadily through the gathered neighbors. Richard moved toward Debbie then, his own phone already out, though not to comfort her, I realized as I watched, but to make a call of his own, stepping several feet away from her, his voice low and clipped, the posture of a man protecting himself rather than his wife. Tom arrived minutes later, having heard the commotion from 2 streets over, folder of his own tucked under his arm. The financial records he'd been quietly compiling for weeks, and made his way directly toward Marcus, introducing himself as a former board member with relevant documentation regarding the HOA's handling of this exact bridge. The emergency crew arrived within 20 minutes, carefully stabilizing the tilted truck, easing it backward off the failing support beam under Mr. Alvarez's direct guidance. The crowd watching in tense silence as the vehicle finally cleared the bridge entirely. Wheels touching solid ground once more. The immediate danger finally passed. No one had been hurt. My chest fully for the first time since the crack first echoed across the creek. A relief so total it nearly buckled my own knees the way the beam had buckled minutes earlier. Grandfather's bridge damaged, but everyone standing. Marcus turned to address the crowd once the truck was clear. Official, measured, every word landing with the particular weight of someone whose job was precisely to determine what had happened and why. This bridge has been under an active county safety flag for weeks, following a documented stress fracture. The property owner, he continued, nodding toward me, filed multiple formal warnings, requested this scheduled inspection weeks ago, and reported an unauthorized overnight reinforcement attempt just 4 days ago. Today's incident occurred despite those warnings being publicly available to the HOA board and its president. The crowd's attention swung fully toward Debbie now, no longer murmuring quietly among themselves but watching her directly, waiting, the way people watch someone finally standing at the center of a truth they'd spent months choosing not to see clearly for themselves. "I didn't force anyone to cross," Debbie said, voice tight, defensive, though noticeably smaller than her usual clubhouse authority. "The driver made his own decision." "Ma'am," Marcus said evenly, "I have you on record telling the vendors to proceed, in front of a dozen witnesses, less than 10 minutes ago." Tom stepped forward then, folder open, addressing Marcus directly though clearly intending every neighbor present to hear every word. "There's more you should know before you file that report," he said. "This isn't the first time she's overridden documented warnings for her own convenience. I have the financial records to show a pattern." Debbie's face drained further at that, the particular pale of someone realizing the ground shifting beneath them extended far beyond a single afternoon, far beyond a single cracked beam, reaching back through months, maybe years, of decisions she'd assumed no one was tracking closely enough to ever fully assemble. "That's private HOA business," she said, though the protest sounded thin even to my own ears, and clearly to the crowds as well. Several neighbors now exchanging glances that had shifted from uncertainty into something closer to recognition. Memories of small unexplained fines, uncontested vendor bids, meetings that never quite added up. Priscilla stepped forward from the crowd, unprompted, phone lowered now, voice carrying clearly across the stunned quiet. "I saw you meet a contractor after hours last spring, exchange an envelope, and that same contractor won the entrance sign bid without any other quotes ever being requested." "I didn't say anything then. I'm saying it now." Another neighbor spoke up, then another, small pieces surfacing one after another. The fake 15-ton inspection report, the forged board vote minutes, the sudden re-election threats whispered right before contested votes. Each detail small alone but forming, together, in front of the entire gathered neighborhood, an unmistakable shape. Debbie's composure finally broke completely. The practiced smile, the clipboard authority, the years of careful control collapsing all at once in front of the same audience she'd spent so long carefully cultivating. "You have no idea what you're all talking about," she said, voice cracking, backing toward the clubhouse. Richard, still several feet away, ended his phone call and turned toward the scene with an expression I hadn't expected. Not anger at the crowd, not defense of his wife, but something closer to resignation. The look of a man who'd clearly suspected something like this day was coming eventually. "Deb," he said quietly, loud enough only for those nearby to catch. "That was my office. They're sending someone to review the county complaint filed against Sarah's firm. Given everything happening here today, I told them to look into it properly. I'm not putting my name behind anything else." Debbie turned to him, something between fury and disbelief crossing her face. The last person in her corner apparently stepping back at the exact moment she needed him most. The isolation of the moment settling visibly over her shoulders in front of the entire neighborhood watching. Marcus, unmoved by the unfolding family drama, simply continued his methodical documentation, photographing the damaged beam, noting witness statements, formally logging Tom's financial records as supplementary evidence for the county's file, treating the human collapse happening around him as background noise to the actual, careful work of determining fact. I stood quietly at the center of it all, folder still in hand, Rosa beside me, Jake having arrived sometime during the chaos and now standing at my other side, watching the woman who'd spent a year trying to break us finally, publicly, undeniably run out of places left to hide. The county's formal investigation moved faster than anyone in Willow Creek expected, Marcus's incident report triggering an immediate structural review, while Tom's financial documentation landed on a fraud investigator's desk within the week, cross-referenced almost instantly against the unexplained Peachtree Hills shortfall from 4 years earlier. Marcus's incident report noted one detail I hadn't fully appreciated until reading it later, that the lighting truck's front axle alone had carried nearly 4 tons onto a beam already weakened by months of prior overweight crossings, meaning the failure had been building steadily long before that Saturday afternoon ever arrived. The county's structural review board later used Willow Creek's incident, anonymized, as a training example for new inspectors, a case study in how documented warnings, ignored repeatedly by someone with informal authority, could turn a manageable hazard into an entirely preventable emergency within a matter of months. Debbie's attorney, during plea negotiations, tried arguing that the bridge failure itself couldn't be directly tied to any single decision she'd made, only for the prosecutor to lay out, chronologically, every warning she'd received and dismissed, a timeline so complete it left very little room left to argue coincidence. Tom told me once, months later, that the hardest part of the whole ordeal for him hadn't been confronting Debbie directly, but sitting quietly through those early meetings where he suspected something was wrong yet still doubted his own judgment enough to stay silent for as long as he did. Rosa's interim leadership brought something Willow Creek hadn't had in years. Board minutes anyone could actually read and understand, posted publicly within days instead of buried. Vendor bids opened to multiple contractors instead of quietly awarded. Small changes that added up to something the neighborhood had nearly forgotten it deserved. I thought, more than once during that long year, about how easily the whole thing could have gone differently if I'd caved to the first threatening letter, if Tom had stayed quiet, if Rosa hadn't trusted her own instincts enough to start passing me those small folded notes. Grandfather used to say that every structure eventually tells you exactly what it's made of, under enough pressure, whether it's steel, timber, or a person standing at a podium insisting the rules simply don't apply to them. I understood that lesson far more completely by the time it was over. It turned out Debbie hadn't just resigned quietly from that previous HOA. She'd been asked to leave under threat of formal charges, an arrangement her old board had accepted quietly to avoid a lengthy legal battle, an arrangement that had let her simply pack up and start over somewhere new. Willow Creek's own financial audit, ordered by the remaining board members within days of the incident, confirmed everything Tom had suspected and more. Nearly $60,000 redirected over 2 years through inflated landscaping contracts and uncontested vendor bids tied to Debbie's extended family. The forged board meeting minutes surfaced formally too, compared against Tom's original handwritten notes and confirmed by a document examiner, the HOA's insurance company insisted on hiring once the scale of the fraud became clear, insurance being, as it turned out, deeply unwilling to cover damages tied to falsified authorization records. Debbie was formally removed from the HOA presidency within 2 weeks. A unanimous board vote this time, No dissent. No quiet threats keeping anyone in line. Just a room full of people finally saying plainly what they'd been too afraid to say clearly for far too long. Criminal charges followed shortly after. Embezzlement and forgery among them, filed by the county after reviewing the full financial audit alongside Marcus's structural incident report. The two separate investigations converging into a single, undeniable picture of exactly how far Debbie had been willing to go. Richard filed for divorce within the month, releasing a brief statement to the county board acknowledging he'd had no knowledge of his wife's financial conduct, recusing himself from any related county matters. A career he'd built carefully over years now permanently shadowed by association whether he'd known anything or not. The unlicensed cousin inspector, facing his own potential liability for signing falsified structural documents, cooperated fully with investigators once approached, providing text messages, cash payment records, and a full statement confirming exactly what Debbie had pressured him to falsify and when, sealing several remaining gaps in the county's case. Mr. Original report, along with his testimony at the eventual hearing, became central evidence establishing the timeline of documented warnings Debbie had ignored. His calm, professional consistency throughout the entire ordeal, exactly the kind of steady credibility that made the county's case difficult to argue against. I testified too, laying out the folder I'd built patiently over nearly a year. Every violation notice, every forged document comparison, every certified letter I'd sent trying to resolve things the right way long before any bridge ever cracked beneath a truck that should never have crossed it. The judge, reviewing the full scope of evidence, noted specifically that Debbie had been formally warned, repeatedly, through proper legal channels, and had chosen escalation and concealment instead every single time, a pattern the court found difficult to interpret as anything other than deliberate, willful disregard for both law and safety. Debbie pleaded guilty eventually to reduced charges in exchange for restitution. Avoiding the longer trial her attorney warned would likely end far worse given the sheer weight of documentation stacked against her. $60,000 in fraud, a falsified structural safety record, and a public incident with dozens of witnesses. Willow Creek held a genuinely different kind of meeting the month after. No clipboard, no forced smiles. Tom stepping back into a temporary board role at the community's direct request. The group working together honestly for what several longtime residents admitted was the first time in years. Rosa, elected to the new interim board herself, insisted on the very first order of business being a full structural fund for the bridge. Community supported this time. Transparent, properly permitted, no shortcuts, no forged approvals, no more pretending 5 tons meant whatever someone in charge wanted it to mean. Priscilla and several other neighbors who'd stayed quiet for months finally spoke openly at that meeting too, apologizing, not for anything they'd done wrong exactly, but for the silence fear had bought from all of them for far too long. Silence that had let one person's control go unchecked for years. I stood at that meeting and simply told the truth. Calm, unembellished, the same way I told it in every letter and report for the past year. The bridge belonged to my family. It had a rating for good reason. And no title or clipboard should ever outweigh basic honest math. Jake attended that meeting too, sitting quietly beside me, and afterward told me it was strange watching people apologize to us, after a year of feeling like the ones who owed everyone else an explanation instead. Funny how that works out, he said. When the truth finally gets a turn. The county, satisfied with the resolution and the community's new transparent structure, lifted the active safety flag once formal repair permits were filed. Mr. Alvarez agreeing to oversee the reconstruction personally. A proper 5-ton certified crossing. Built right this time. Built to actually hold. Debbie moved away quietly before sentencing concluded. No gala. No announcement. No clipboard trailing behind her this time. Just a moving truck of her own crossing a bridge in some other county entirely. One I sincerely hoped had been properly rated and honestly maintained for whoever lived there next. I never heard from her again after that. No final confrontation. No dramatic goodbye. Just the particular quiet that settles after a long storm finally passes, leaving behind a clearer sky and a community slowly remembering what it felt like to trust each other again. The new bridge went up that spring. Wider, sturdier, funded honestly through community contributions rather than any inflated landscaping budget. Mr. Alvarez signing off on every stage of construction personally. My grandfather's original support beams honored in a small plaque mounted near the entrance. Tom stayed on as permanent board treasurer, insisting on full financial transparency at every single meeting going forward. Monthly statements posted publicly. No exceptions. No closed-door sessions. The kind of boring, careful accountability that Willow Creek had somehow gone years without ever actually demanding from anyone. Rosa became HOA president herself that fall. Elected almost unanimously, running her first meeting with tea and cookies instead of fines, spending her opening address simply thanking the neighborhood for finally learning, together, what it looked like to hold each other accountable honestly instead of fearfully. Jake still brings up the crack in the beam sometimes, half proud, half amazed, telling the story to friends who visit as though it were an adventure rather than a year of quiet documentation and careful patience. Maybe, in its own way, it was exactly both those things at once. I still cross that bridge every single morning, coffee in hand, checking the new steel supports out of old habit more than real worry now. Grateful for a quiet, honest neighborhood, and for a grandfather who built something 60 years ago sturdy enough to eventually outlast every lie built on top of it. The unlicensed cousin inspector, once his cooperation was formalized, told investigators he genuinely believed, first, that Debbie had proper authority to request his signature, only realizing much later how deliberately she'd used his inexperience to manufacture the appearance of legitimate safety approval. Willow Creek's insurance company sent a formal representative to the community meeting where the audit results were announced, explaining plainly that the forged authorization records had nearly voided coverage entirely, a detail that landed harder on some neighbors than even the criminal charges eventually did. I kept Mr. written note from all those months earlier, the one describing the crack as not critical yet, folded inside the back cover of my folder, a small reminder of exactly how much time honest warnings had bought us before the worst possible outcome nearly arrived anyway. Some nights that winter, after the trial concluded, I'd walk down to the new bridge alone just to stand on it, feeling the solid, unhurried give of properly rated steel underfoot, thinking about how close we'd come to losing something my grandfather built with nothing but patience and honest math. Jake started asking more questions about engineering after that year, curious in a way he hadn't been before, and I found myself explaining load limits and safety margins the same patient way my grandfather once explained them to me, the lesson passing quietly down another generation. People sometimes ask me if I regret how far I let things go before the truth finally came out. Whether I should have fought louder, sooner, differently. I don't think so. Exactly the right amount of pressure, applied patiently, before the truth can finally hold its own weight. Debbie built her whole authority on the idea that nobody would ever check the math, that fear would always outweigh documentation, that a clipboard and a confident voice could outlast an actual 5-ton rating forever. She was wrong. The way every structure built on ignored limits eventually, inevitably, is. Willow Creek isn't perfect now. No neighborhood ever is. But it's honest. And after a year of watching one woman's empire built on forged signatures and quiet threats, honest feels like more than enough. Some bridges just need someone patient enough to wait for the truth to finally cross them.